What's up, guys? Erroneous here, back with another Raid Shadow Legends video. In today's video, I really want to talk about what makes a good gacha game, and in terms of Raid Shadow Legends, how is it good and how will it continue to maintain its player base, what makes Raid good in general in that sense, and what makes it not so good as well. And I'm going to be pulling in an article that I found online. It's an older article. Basically, it's just like a beginner's guide to what makes a gacha game good. So let's get into it. All right, y'all. So in terms of what makes a game good, I actually have an article here in regards to beginner's guide to what makes a gacha game good, right? And this is more so because there's been a lot of videos circulating around Raid Shadow Legends, disparity with players. They don't like the game, where it's going, what the direction's going with the game. They don't like how Raid is predatory. They don't like how the perception of Raid is not so great. And I want to talk a little bit about that in today's video, but I wanted to pull up an article. This was from Marcus Orchard, 2019. I'm going to read through this article, but also give my input as I'm going through and my thoughts and processes with regard to Raid Shadow Legends and how this ties into gacha Raid, right? So in terms of getting into gacha games, it says it is a trap. That's just a gimme, right? You should know that gacha games are a trap unless you've never played gacha games before. Raid Shadow Legends is actually my first true gacha game, I guess you could say, unless Clash of Clans is considered a gacha game as well. I guess you can consider that one too, but yeah, Raid is sort of my official gacha for this sort of genre, right? And it says, but one that millions of us have begrudgingly fallen into. Gacha games are addicting, using fan service and gameplay to add to the rush that gambling gives to us. So fan service and gameplay, which means they want to try to tie into different things that we like. For example, when they bring out all these different champions for free, Ronda, Ronda was like a fan service type of thing, right? Then you have this new champion recently, I forget her name, Xena from the show way back then. I never personally watched the show. It came out just before my time. So, I'm not a huge fan of Xena because I've never really watched it. So I can't say I was or I'm not a huge fan of it. But it's just they're trying to appeal to their player base in certain ways to try to pull people in, right? To gain more and more profit off of it. So it's easy for gacha games to be predatory. So in that sense, yes, it can be predatory. But at the end of the day, you, the player, myself, the player, has the option to either buy or not buy. At the end of the day, we are paying for JPEGs on a screen. We are literally just paying for things that you can't actually have in your hand in real life. It's on a screen. It's not real. It's all in a video game. So people are playing to have fun. People are paying so that they can boost themselves to the top because they want to be the best. That's how I see it. I feel like people want to be the absolute best and they want to be able to rank themselves amongst the rest of the people in the world. So a lot of times pay-to-win players are trying to be the absolute best in this game. And most pay-to-win players are usually only doing it because of they have a huge clan, or they're trying to be number one on the leaderboards or top 500 in platinum. Or maybe some players might like the experience of just getting skins for the game. Now, there's not very many skins out there for Raid, but some people, that's appealing. Majority of them tend to emphasize making money at the expense of players' experience. Still, despite all the trash in the pile of gacha games, there are a few wonderful experiences for players to enjoy. What makes these games noteworthy, though? So, in terms of Raid is such an expansive game. It's such a massive game. And over time, they've built on top of it and built on top of it and continue to do so. So it can be a great experience. One of the best experiences, in my opinion, that I want to take away is the Doom Tower. So Doom Tower, in my opinion, is one of the best experiences in Raid because the developers are giving a lot back to us and it's very challenging content, which allows you to keep on trying to progress, right? So many players play this game for PvE and many players play it for PvP. PvP leans towards a lot more spenders, whereas PvE leans a lot more towards low spend or free-to-play players. Right? So the experiences between and across the player base is going to be completely different from player to player. There are a lot of factors that determine whether or not a gacha game is worth someone's time. For some, solid gameplay is enough. Others want impressive graphics or a fine presentation. For a lot of players, though, the most important aspect of a gacha game is how accessible it is to players that aren't willing to pay for a premium currency, right? So myself, I'm a free-to-play player. I do have a pay-to-win account as well, but mainly I focus on my free-to-play account because I enjoy the grind that comes from these types of games, these type of strategy-driven games where you're constantly gearing and re-gearing to try to get the best and fastest teams possible, or to progress yourself further in the end game to hopefully compete with the top end of players in the world. That's why I love the game, but I love doing it without having to use real life money. Okay, so not everybody's like that. Some people, they want to come home, they don't have time to play, so they put their money into a game to make their progression a little bit faster, which is totally fine, but not everybody is the same. Others want impressive graphics. For a lot of players, though, the most important aspect of the game is how accessible it is. Developers need to be generous in order to not only entice new players coming in, but keep them on board for the long haul. Of course, being generous isn't necessarily enough. And we already know that in regards to Raid Shadow Legends, how generous or not generous they are in general. And there also needs to be enough content to justify players coming back time after time. So in terms of Raids developers being generous, that is the huge disparity or a fight that people are having right now with the game. So the No Dime December, for example, that J-Gigs brought out, and then a lot of people are reacting to it. And then, you know, you've got Hell Hades, you've got tons of other players in the space right now, content creators that are talking about this, and the fact that they're not as generous as we'd like them to be. So the generosity comes from new content, new events, new tournaments, new things in the game that are accessible for players who aren't there just to use in real life currency to purchase in-game currency, artifacts, things like that for their champions to progress. Like, for example, one good thing that Raid has recently done is the Yuletide event. Now, it's not 100% free, you could say. Technically it is, but in a sense, for some players, it's a perception thing. So players will have a different experience in the game based on perception. And I think the biggest thing with Raid Shadow Legends and with Plarium and the developers in general is they need to create a better perception for the player base when it comes to, on the front end, you're going to say that you're going to do something, right? And then in the back end, when it actually comes out, all this content, it's not exactly what you expected based on what you've read. So for example, I think this Yuletide event, it talks about essentially you can get a certain amount of points for free. You know, it says right here, the Titan event, you'll be able to earn up to 2,500 snow points, 1,530 of the snow points during the first half of the event, and 970 snow points during the second half of the event. You will only need 2,000 snow points to unlock all the milestone rewards. There are plenty of valuable rewards to be earned alongside the milestone rewards as well. Also, don't miss out on the free snow points you can get every single day from the daily offers, and you can get up to 500 points for free so that you can boost your progress, grab today's gift, and so on and so forth. So in terms of this, people were mad because they're like, oh, you didn't really talk about the summon rush having to be so crazy for some. Right? For example, not everybody has shards saved. Not everybody has the shards to do this. So this is already 300 points out of the 500 that you get for free. So that means in the back end, more than likely, they're going to have another 200 points for another summon rush, or potentially 300 points or more for another summon rush or champion chase in the end. And that stuff's not brought up and it's not forthcoming. It doesn't talk about whether there are going to be summon rush events included in this, right? It doesn't talk about that because they don't really want you to know that, because they're being a little bit predatory in a sense that they hope that people will spend a little bit of their hard-earned money in real life to be able to get this, because they're going to be stuck if they don't do certain events, and that is Summon Rush or even Dungeon Divers, which has been just recently, Dungeon Divers has become more and more difficult to complete. So either they want people to spend for shards or they want people to spend for energy to be able to boost their progression to potentially get a free Void Legendary Champion. So that's where it becomes a little bit predatory. And you know for a fact that in all these different events that they create, yes, this event could be potentially considered predatory as a progressive chance. Why? Because it gives you that perception that it might be a little bit better. Doesn't necessarily mean that it is a lot better. It is better, but it's not much better. So 15x, awesome. But what did the player base want? The player base wanted 25x forever. So did Plarium listen? Did the developers listen? Partially, not fully. So what happens is people are pulled back and forth, and their thoughts on Plarium becomes such a disparity, and that they don't really care for the developers or for the Plarium because of the fact that they give us a little bit, but they never listen to us fully, or the player base or content creators fully. That's why people are frustrated, because they give us a little bit, but they don't ever go the full distance to give us something for free. Which, again, if you think about it as an organization, why would an organization just want to hand out things for free if they're trying to make profits? Raid Shadow Legends is still one of the top, I think it's number one in the gacha gaming space in terms of this sort of genre of gaming style, this dark fantasy type of gaming style. So keep that in mind. They're never going to give us something fully for free because they are an organization and they are trying to make money. But at the same time, they are cycling through their players like water. Top-end players that are spending money are the ones that face this the most, because these top-end players are trying to get certain champions and they just can't get them, and they never shift metas. That's a big issue. In the first article in the series that breaks down gacha games for the beginning, I'm going to briefly cover the most vital pieces of gacha gaming and highlight a couple games that do these parts well. So presentation. They bring out Epic 7. Now, me personally, I'm not a huge anime gacha person. I never actually played an anime gacha. I do watch anime, but I'm not as into the graphics of the anime as compared to what we have in Raid. It's a lot crisper in terms of the presentation of the champions and things like that. So the developers do well, and Raid does hit a home run on that, whereas anime, it's not as good. A game usually needs to have fine presentation in order to pull in the players. Raid has that. They have fine presentation. Interesting looking characters, a clean interface, and a high quality sound and graphics all help to make a good gacha game. Without all of these things, a gacha game can feel hollow over time, especially if it's missing good sound design or a clean interface. A fancy presentation doesn't necessarily make it or break a game, but it's hard to capture the spirits of players without it. Finally, appealing art is obviously a key part of the game's presentation, because without it, why pull for JPEGs? Almost said JGigs. JPEGs. Games that have solid presentation. Dragalia Lost, Honkai Impact, Epic 7, and Fate. It looks like they're kind of pulling in a lot of the anime-esque type of games genre, and maybe that's a huge presentation or huge gaming space out of country, but I don't know about in the US. I feel like Raid appeals more so for an older audience. Maybe this game appeals for more of a younger audience. I'm not 100% sure on that. Longevity of a game. What's the point of investing your time and money into a game if you are just going to quit it as soon as starting? A gacha game needs to last a while, or it will find itself getting deleted after weeks of being forgotten. A gacha game's main campaign needs to be of decent length, with which Raid Shadow Legends does have a decent length main campaign, where it does easy, normal, nightmare campaign, which is nice, but it never really expanded on that. It never did anything different. It's just the same campaign run at harder levels. So there was never an expansion. Now, with the new content coming up soon, there is going to be an expansion of what looks like to be either new campaign-esque type maps intertwined or intermingled with like dungeon bosses. So it feels like a new campaign map that's twice the size and just has new types of mechanics, but with the similar bosses that you're facing either in dungeons or in Doom Tower. So that could be a little bit of a twist, a little more of a flair. So some players might like that. It might be interesting. But at the same time, other players might find that to be a little bit boring or not outside of the box, because they're still using the same champions or same bosses that you've been fighting all along. So basically, the games need to be developed in a way that brings in new players, not just trying to keep the same player base as well and keeping them happy just because they want more content that's more endgame, which would be mainly tied to or tailored to big spenders. Because what big spenders are going to get to the end game extremely fast, and they're going to get bored a lot faster than players that are low spend or no spend. Okay, so keep that in mind. The developers also need to regularly release interesting content to engage both new and old players as well. Whether it be limited time events or entirely new modes, gacha games need to stay fresh. So entirely new modes is what people, in my opinion, are looking for. They're not just looking for copy-paste modes. And I have high hopes that the new content is not going to be like that. But when they tease the double bosses, it makes it seem like you're literally just going to be facing dungeon bosses in the new content that you've already fought, but they're going to just be teamed up together. If that's the case, it's clearly not going to be entirely new modes. New modes in a sense of mechanics where you have to bring in different champions to fight the same bosses because they're going to be using their different abilities together as compared to when you're fighting the bosses singled out. Yeah, it does note different games with longevity. It does not note Raid Shadow Legends in this article at all. Again, I think this is more leaning towards a lot of anime type games that are gacha. But again, I'm not a huge fan of the anime genre for gacha. That's just me. So gameplay, games are meant to be fun. Gacha games are no different. If it isn't fun, no one is going to play it, of course. There's a lot of diversity in gacha games, from turn-based, Grand Blue, Fantasy, Review Starlight to active action Dragalia Lost. Most are role-playing games, but a few of the strategy-based Fire Emblem Heroes and Brown Dust, I've heard of a couple of these games. Some games are quirky and a bit different from the Oh My Office, I don't know what that is. Then, of course, some gacha games revolve around puzzles or music, right? So there was a previous game, I don't recall the name. I'm trying to recall it, but I don't remember the name. It was actually showcased and portrayed by a bunch of CCs, but it ended up losing value very quickly. I just don't recall it off the top of my head. It's up to you to find the kind of game you are looking for. So yeah, in general, in terms of games being fun, yes, Raid Shadow Legends is a fun game, but it depends on how you see the game, right? So if you're progressing in the game and it's becoming boring for you because you've collected all the champions or you've basically beat everything and all you're focusing on is PvP, it can become pretty boring, right? So I think that in terms of how can they continue to progress the game and make it new, they would probably need to bring in different types of mechanics into the game or create a alternate type of universe or, an alternate form of the game where you're running around open world or something like that, where it might appeal to other players outside of just regular gacha, right? So if you continue to create just new campaign maps that are a little bit different, but still somewhat similar, where you're just going and fighting bosses in different mobs of waves, where it's just one wave after the next wave after the next wave, it might get boring fairly quickly. So the coolest part about the Doom Tower is, yes, you're still fighting waves and waves and waves of bosses, and it's interesting because it brings forth a lot of different rewards, and that's what keeps people wanting to keep on coming back to Doom Tower and getting the best rewards possible, right, at the top echelon of this. So like, for example, in Hard Doom Tower, you can get the 3 Void Shards, and then you can get the nice Sacred Shard at the end, so that kind of keeps you wanting to push for this. But then again, if you think about it, we just don't want the same content copy-pasted. People don't want that. And people want the perception from Plarium to be more open and honest from the jump. And unfortunately, I feel like in general, most organizations that are trying to make money are never going to tell us everything, every detail of what's going to happen next, because they're trying their best to make money at the end of the day. Appealing characters. So, of course, Raid Shadow Legends has appealing characters. And in this sense, yes, this is no problem with Raid Shadow Legends. Raid Shadow Legends has no issues with appealing characters. What they do have issues with is appealing characters from a sense of what does their kit look like. So Raid Shadow Legends has this tendency of continuing to water down the good champions, right, in the game. So they have, over 800 champions at this point in the game, and they continue to make champions that are not so great for Void Legendaries, right, over time, because they don't want you as a player to get all the best champions right away. Because again, this is another aspect of where could it have been potentially predatory? It's possible. It's a way for them to be able to say to the player base, or not say, but it's a perception from the player base where it's like, okay, I'm missing out on all of these champions that I can't get, and that's another reason why big spenders quit the game, because they can't get Tarasa Marichka, and they keep getting, let's say, Gurgo the Augur, or they keep getting other champions as well that aren't so great, that are void legendary. Maybe they keep pulling Supreme Elhain, or maybe they keep pulling this Vitreous. They create these champions that look good from the face of it. This is just the cover of the book. Whereas if you start reading the book, they're actually not that great. They look good, but they're not actually great in practice. So unfortunately, players will get very, very frustrated from that, and they'll want to leave. So that's the issue with Raid for their characters. Like they do fine with appealing characters, but in a sense where they look good, but they don't always play good. All right. So there's that. Now, in terms of developer generosity, this is kind of what I talked about earlier, but to kind of dive into this a little bit more, do you plan on spending money on the game? Of course, there's a lot of players that play this game that typically spend because they want to compete in different areas, or they just want to get a leg up quicker, and maybe they work a lot, right? So there is a lot of older players who play this game that are between the age of 25 and 45 years old, sometimes even older. And so myself, I'm 30 years old. So of course I do have a pay to win account, but I have a free to play account, which I actually have more fun on my free to play account, but that's just me. Not everybody cares about being free to play and grinding so hard and heavily. I do. I love doing it. It's a challenge, and it keeps the game fresh for me, because when I spend money and say I get every single champion, it gets boring a lot faster because you've beaten the game, or you've beaten certain areas of the game so much quicker. So it does say, regardless of your answer, you should care if the developer is generous. And is Raid generous? And what did JGigs talk about? Is the developers, or are the developers generous to the player base on a consistent basis? The answer is no. Raid developers are not generous on a consistent basis. It's very inconsistent, actually. And when it's so inconsistent to the point where they're constantly bringing out champions that are not so good and then buffing them later on. I'll take that one example from this previous fragment champion, Ugir, where they could have buffed him before releasing him to the player base, which would have made him a more enticing champion to go for, right? And if he was buffed earlier before, more players would want to go for him. Yes, it was very hard to get him, but he would have been a lot more enticing because his kit was not as good before the buff. And now he can block revive on everybody no matter what happens. Okay, so because of that, it made the player base frustrated if they're able to flash fix, and when I say flash fix, I mean take Hydra, for example. Take Madman, right? Take other champions as well, like Corpulent Cadaver, who you used in Hydra to get multiple millions worth of damage, even billions worth of damage. They flash nerf them, which means instantly within a week. Instantly within less than a month. Whereas champions who have been in the game for so long, they are not actually looking at, they're not paying attention to it. They're actually focusing on bringing in new champions so that it helps their bottom line. That's why players are frustrated. They would prefer not to buff champions because it actually goes against their bottom line. This is just me speculating, right? I'm not saying I'm a Plarium employee or I work directly for Plarium, but I am a content creator for the Plarium program, or for the Raid Shadow Legends program. Now, in terms, that's just my opinion, right? I feel like if they create more champions, it allows people to want to spend more to get the better champions, right? More often. If they continue to buff champions, a lot of times multiple players, or most players in the game, may already have those champions. Let's take one example. Tila Gourmet used to be an absolute dog water of a champion. She was trash. I had 2 of her on my free-to-play account for years. Never used her. And then I only used her in Faction Wars at level 50. And then she got a buff. And now she has the crazy HP burn AoE, crazy Hex as well. And she's super strong. The resistance in all battles now too. And then she got a buff to the A1 as well, which makes her crazy strong. If you already have a champion, that's going to affect their bottom line, whereas you don't have a new champion. Does that make sense? So if you have a new champion that comes out, they're going to make more money and profits off of that because more people are going to want to go for it, especially the end game players who don't have those new champions. They always want to try and test something new to keep it fresh and to hopefully shape and change the meta. But right now, there's really no meta in the game. It's just Marichka and Taras. So they need to buff existing champions to make people happy that don't have Marichka and Taras as well. But if they don't do that, people are going to continue to get frustrated because it's not giving a fresh flair to the game. It's not making the game feel like anybody can participate, anybody can do it. It's just a certain percentage of the player base that can participate at the high echelons of gameplay for PvP. Doesn't necessarily mean you can't compete in PvE. It's just that many players feel like, for example, Live Arena is disparaging, right? They go into there and they get absolutely smoked by players that have been playing for so long, and they face players that have Sifis and Marichkas and Taras in silver. And some people are just stuck in bronze, for example, for Live Arena. Same thing for Arena and Tag Team Arena. Players that haven't been playing for a long time drop back. So Plarium needs to look into potentially getting rid of those accounts and just completely deleting those accounts or creating an inactive on them, whereas they just won't appear on the lists for Tag Team or on the lists for Arena in the lower echelons of Arena, which gates the players that are lower in the game. Or new players, that is, right? So that's just my thought process on this. If they're more generous, where they bring out events like this, for example, the Yuletide Titan event, where you can actually get your hands on a free legendary that's void, that makes sense. If they're bringing out other events where they have like the Path of Light event, where they actually give you good rewards, that makes sense. The passes, is this generous from a developer perspective? Majority of you will say no, it's not very generous because it's $60 to get this champion, but the rewards in between, it's a huge perception thing. So it's not just about, being generous. It's also about perception. Now, some people will say, hey, this is worth $60 or this is worth $40 because you're getting a legendary. And some might say that, yes, it's absolutely worth it because $40 will take you so far in getting this legendary, whereas you can buy 3 or 4 packs for $200 and not get a legendary at all. So some people might say that, no, I beg to differ. This was a great event. The issue is people are laser focused on these rewards right here, which are not that good. 50k silver, 5 brews, 50 gems, 1 clan boss key. Who wants that? Who wants that at an end game account? This seems like it's tailored towards a beginner account, not a later end game account. So for beginners who are just starting out, they might not realize this is not the best path, type event, or Forge. What do you call this? The champion pass. It's like a battle pass event. So early game players, maybe they're just starting out, they'll think that this is great. But later game, end game, mid game players who've been playing for a while know for a fact that this is not that great from a perception standpoint. These rewards could have definitely been better. But in the end of the day, $40 for a legendary can sometimes be cheaper than paying for 3 or 4 packs that could cost you $100 to $200 and you don't get a legendary. So that's kind of something to think about as well. Other things that people are looking for. Okay, so, and just to finish up with this, be sure to look for a game that gives out tons of free stuff. People will stick to a game when they know they're getting being generous, right? Where the developers are generous and they're thanking the player base more often for playing their game and continuing to play their game. Because at the end of the day, it's also not just about the money monetization side of it. So they can make multiple millions of dollars in a month. But if they don't have players actually playing consistently every single day, it may not look good to their stakeholders. Other things to look for. So some players will be looking for some other things in their gacha games. Maybe anime themes aren't appealing. So I did talk about it in the beginning. Anime themes do not appeal to me. That's just my personal opinion, although I do love anime. JJK is amazing. Attack on Titan's amazing. One Piece, Naruto, all those different animes are amazing. Marvel Strike Force, again, love Marvel, love DC stuff too, but Marvel Strike Force was never personally appealing to me. though the devs aren't too generous. If you are looking for something more competitive, Shadowverse is a great time. Another Eden is fine single player experience that doesn't lean on gacha. If you'd like to get into something new, maybe try Review Starlight or an upcoming game like Sino Alice. There are plenty of options for players to dive into. As you might have noticed, a lot of games overlap in quality, generosity, and theme. So it's about the quality, the generosity of the developers, and the theme of the game. Not everybody's the same. Not everybody wants to play the same way. There are a lot of rough games out there, but the few gems are absolutely worth getting into. In future guides, we will cover more games in depth. So that's the article. That's what I wanted to go over in today's video. And I just want to let you know that this No Dime December thing is important in a sense where it's trying to get Plarium to really open their eyes. It's trying to get Plarium to listen a little bit more, because if they hurt a little bit at their bottom line and realize that the players are just at a point where they're so upset with what's going on in the game, and they're constantly getting these little nuggets of items that, yes, you're getting a little bit, but you're not doing it 100%. It's like you're at 70% or 60% of the way there, and then you just cut it short. A lot of these events or these tournaments, or you kind of, it does seem very predatory in a way, but I get it from a sense that, yes, as an organization, they need to make money. They need to find ways to get the players to spend a little bit of money. But at the end of the day, a lot of players will purchase the monthly raid pass. So that's one way of them making tons and tons of money off of player base. And then there are some players who might have never even cut their credit card off from having the raid pass. So they might have quit the game and the raid pass is still going. So some people might even forget that. And they're still passively making income. And they could easily passively continue to create income from bringing out these awesome events where it's champion pass, right? But battle passes. If they bring out better ones where it's like $30, or if it could be $40, totally fine. But they need to have better perception when it comes to rewards here. The top rewards are totally fine. They're free, 100%. You just need to grind for them. I will say you could throw us a little bit of a bone and make 50K to like 250, 50 energy to 150, and 20 multi-battles to 50 multi-battles. And then brews, change the brews out entirely, change that to a chaos or 5 or 6 star legendary. Silver needs to be a lot higher. So that's just my opinion. Change the XP to a 3-day XP, change this glyph to a 4 or 5 star glyph. And then below, if they're going to pay $40 or $60, make these rewards much more enticing and appealing to the people that are paying, and you will make your profits skyrocket. Trust me, you will definitely skyrocket in profits because more people are going to want to pay, because they're going to feel like, from a perception standpoint, that is a much better deal and they're getting more than just a champion out of it. So if that was the case, and there was a thing that Jay Giggs said, well, why don't you just give us the champion at face value instead of all the rest of the rewards, and people will pay for it more potentially? Because people weren't ever complaining about Xena. They were only complaining about the rewards they were getting in between. And no matter what, at the end of the day, you're not going to make everybody happy. Not everybody in the player base thinks and reacts and does things the same. So there are going to be always two sides of a coin where some people might be happy and some people might not be happy. But at the end of the day, when you're continuously staying on the same track of constantly having a give and take from the player base, and the perception of what's going on with these events and these tournaments and things looks bad because you say something and then people think a certain way, and then they actually come to the event and it's nothing like what they expected, that's what makes the player base frustrated. So I think the biggest part about a biggest change that Raid could make right now to make the game a little bit better is going to be changing the perception up front, changing the verbiage, changing what they're saying about certain events and tournaments before it goes live, changing the champions that your content creators are testing and saying, hey, there's issues with this champion. Change the champion before it comes out. Don't nerf champions right away that have similar issues, like, for example, the Hydra champions, Madman and Corpulent Cadaver. Don't nerf them instantly and then say to the player base, well, you know, Trunda and the other ones, they're just legendaries. They're legendaries. We don't want the rares to be so good, basically. That's fine. Just say that. You know, don't say, well, Hydra, this champion's been out well before Hydra was made. Well, if you think about it, Corpulent Cadaver's been out before Hydra was made. Trunda's been out before Hydra was made, and she's a legendary champion, and her skill, her kit is like bugged with the Hydra, where she's doing insane numbers. And then Yumeko, they won't change her kit either. So it's a perception piece of it. We know that you're trying to make money. It doesn't need to be hidden. People already see that. It's a fact of the matter that you need to own it. Own what your mistakes are. Own what's happening. Do not skirt around it. Do not sugarcoat it. Just tell it to us straight. And I think people will be a lot happier. And then make your events and tournaments a little bit more generous, like this Yuletide event. I will say some people still complain about it, but this is a start. Anyways, that's going to be it for this one. If I've missed anything, please leave your thoughts and comments down below. I'm just trying to help understand and go over longevity and what makes a gacha game good. Could this game be even better? Yes, it could. It is a good game. Is it the best game? I can't say yes or no. I would say yes, for me, it's a good game, and it definitely could be better in the future. Anyways, thanks again for watching, and I'll see you on a video soon. Take care.